Hello and welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be sharing the post-production on a mini documentary I worked on called Boxed Up. So in the end, I actually decided to get someone else to do the edit on the video. Now, this was for a couple of reasons. Peter, who I got to do the editing, he's also called Peter, he wasn't there on the day when I was filming, and he wasn't necessarily going to be attached to some of the shots because I can find myself being attached to shots that might not necessarily serve the story. So they might look really nice, or I might think there's something technically interesting about them. But if they don't serve the story, then for a documentary, they maybe aren't, don't have a place in the final video. So I was quite hands off on it. I just sort of trusted him to get on with it and left him to do it. And I think he did a really amazing job. He made some changes and he took some decisions that I never would have done. It was tricky because it had to be edited to 5 minutes for the challenge. Part of me does feel like there was more footage there that we could make a slightly longer documentary from. But I'm also in two sides and think maybe I should just let sleeping dogs lie and move on and just accept it as it is as a 5-minute piece, because I think it does work well. I think, having someone else to edit, that can be really good if you have the option. And just like I said, having that step removed from it, I think it really allowed him to focus on what the real story was. I don't want to spoil that too much. So I will post the documentary soon on here. I'm just entering it into a couple more screenings and things like that to see what happens there. And then I'll get it uploaded onto YouTube so that everyone can see it. But for this video, the rest of it, I'm going to just concentrate on the color grading side of things. Okay, that's enough talking here. I'll join you over on the computer and we can have a look at the footage together. Okay, I've headed over to my computer and I've loaded up the project with the file in DaVinci Resolve. Now, as you can see, I've got my wide shot here, and down here I've got all my different clips. So it was done in Premiere Pro by the editor, by Peter, and then I've carried it over by importing it as a timeline into DaVinci. I can cover that in another video, but there's also other tutorials from other people online if you want to look a bit more into how to do round trips from Premiere. But I'll just assume that you know that for this video. One of the first important things to do is set up your project settings correctly. Now, for this particular project, I was shooting with B-RAW. I was using Blackmagic cameras, and I was shooting with B-RAW. Obviously if you're using different color spaces, different file formats like ProRes and other things like that, you might need to check your steps that you need to do for yourself. I was using B-RAW. I was shooting with two different cameras. So I was shooting with the Blackmagic Ursa Mini 4.6K G2 as my A cam, and then as my B cam I had the 6K Pro, the Blackmagic 6K Pro. These cameras are very similar. They look quite similar, but they do actually have a slightly different color science that they're using. So in these settings here, on the side of camera raw, I can set these to do Gen 5. So the Ursa by default only has Gen 4 color science. It's a bit annoying that they never just released an update for it, because it would probably be pretty straightforward for them to do. But you can convert it in post inside of DaVinci to Gen 5 from Gen 4. So it just brings all of the colors a lot closer together with the 6K, which shoots in Gen 5 as standard. So I set that up in the camera raw, but obviously if you're shooting with different cameras and different formats, you need to check for your particular camera. But this just tells all of the clips to be registered as color science Gen 5. The other important thing to set up here is in color management. Now, there's different ways you can do color management, and again, Cullen Kelly and Darren Mostyn have really good videos on this, and you can find lots of great tutorials, so I'm not going to go into depth on this, but definitely check that out if it's something you're not familiar with. You have some different options in here. Now, there's a DaVinci Color Managed. So this, essentially, DaVinci Resolve takes care of things for you, and this can be really good depending on what you're working on. It can be a really quick way to do it and where you don't have to worry about it, and it does all of the color space transforms in the background. But I often like to work with nodes, so I do my color space transforms myself in nodes. I'll explain a little bit more why I did that and why I did it for this project. But just to know for now, I usually work in the DaVinci, just regular DaVinci YRGB. And then I set the timeline color space to DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. Again, I won't go into details about what that is, but it's just a really wide working color space. So it gives us sort of a really wide color space to work within. And then our output color space is a standard Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Now, one of the first things I do is, because the clips all come in, we've got the interview split up, as you can see down here. We've got the close shot, we've got the wide shot, and I go through and I group all of the similar clips. So in order to do that, you select all the clips you want. So you just hold an option and select each of the clips, and then you can add into a new group. I'm not going to do this now because it will wipe all of the settings I've got here. But what's one of the first steps I do is I go through and I'd group all of the similar clips. And this allows me to edit them as a whole, as a set of clips together, so I don't have to keep doing the same thing each time on every single clip, because it gets really, really time consuming. And I do think a big part of color grading is trying to make things as easy as possible for yourself in terms of not having to repeat everything. So wherever you can make things more streamlined or optimize them, you should. Okay, so after I've gone through them, it's time to get into the slightly more fun part of things. I'll just close the clips here. So I usually always start with the wide. In this particular project, obviously the interview was really the main part, really crucial part of it. And the wide shot in particular was one of the main shots we used throughout. So I use this as my starting point for the grade. Now up here, because I've turned this into a group, we have different options here. So this is the clip level. This is the pre-clip level, group pre-clip. Then we have the clip level here. This isn't actually doing anything, so I'll just remove that. I'll come back to this in a moment. Then we have the group. So this is everything that's in this group will have the same things applied to it. It's the same nodes applied to it. And then this is our timeline. So this is the entire project. So everything that's put on here will be applied to every single clip and group in the project. Now, as you can see, it's in a flat color profile. It's in a log, it's shot in RAW. So everything's flat. It's low contrast, which is perfect to start our grading. But what we need to do is bring it into a sort of friendly color space, something we can view easily. Now, the first thing we need to do is a input display transform, or device transform, sorry, or a color space transform at the start. Now, I add this in the group pre-clip here. You can add this in different places depending on how you work with your workflow, but if we're using a node-based color space transform, we need to put this somewhere, and usually it's at the start of the pipeline. In order to do this, I'll just show you here quickly. I always label, so always make sure to label. I just call it color space transform for now. We can drag over our color space transform, and then you get this selection of window up here. Now, these are the settings I use because of the particular camera I was shooting with, so these are the settings I used. And then the key thing is I turned it to the DaVinci wide gamut intermediate. So the color space is wide gamut, and then the output gamut is DaVinci intermediate. So then that's everything after this node is going to be in that color space until we tell it to convert to something else. Okay, so now I'll go over to the timeline. So the final one in the set of options up here. And this is where we do our other color space transform. So this is transforming it into a viewing color space. So classically, this is sort of a Rec 709, the Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Now I do something a little bit different here, and I actually use a custom output transform. And it's actually it's a DRT, it's called, and you can find this online. I'll just show you how this looks. Now, bear with me. I know this is looking a little bit underexposed, and I did do that on purpose, which I'll explain in a minute. I'll turn that on and off. You can see it's taken it into a sort of more user-friendly or viewer-friendly format, and it's a much better starting place for our grade. Inside of here, the way we apply this is what's called a DCTL. Now, I won't go into that because we could spend an entire video talking about DCTLs. They're built using code that DaVinci understands, and it's a good way of adding sort of plugins, if you like, in some ways, and different effects. And there's lots of people out there making amazing DCTLs. This one's for free, and it's called JP2499 underscore DRT. If you search for that on Google, you should be able to find it quite easily. Now, it is still in the Rec 709 color space Gamma 2.4 as indicated here, but the reason I use this is I just slightly prefer how it renders the colors. I just like how it looks more. It doesn't mean it's right for all projects. For this particular project, I just preferred how the colors look as a starting point. Now, what you'd classically do is use DaVinci's built-in color space transform. So like what we did on the clip level here, but instead we do it as a color space transform as an output one here. So I'll just turn this off, and then I'll turn on DaVinci's one. You can mess around with different settings here, but for the sake of time, I've just done a quick one here. So as you know, we were in wide gamut and then DaVinci intermediate, and then I've converted it to Rec 709 and Gamma 2.4. So turn that on and off. So that's just showing you how it converts it into our color space. But if I'll take a still of that, and I'll just show you the difference between this CST out and then the DRT. So I've just selected our still clip from the gallery. And now I'll click here and I'll show you the selected still image. Yeah, over here is DaVinci's color space transform, and over here is the DRT, so the custom DRT. Now I just way prefer how it handles the highlights, roll off, and the skin tones and the overall color. This one from DaVinci has a lot more magenta in it overall, and the roll off from the shadows to the highlights is just not quite as pleasing in my opinion. And how it handles blues as well and other colors is just slightly more pleasing. So for me, that's just a better starting point. It might be on other projects that this looks better, or it might just be personal preference and you prefer this one. But overall, I just prefer how it handles all of the colors and all the other aspects a lot better. And I think it's just a great starting point. Now, as I mentioned, it's a little bit underexposed. Now, I made this decision on the day to slightly underexpose because we had very bright windows and I just had one light that I was working with. It was a pretty limited kit I had. I was trying to balance not letting the windows get blown out because it was quite a long interview and the sun was going to travel during the clip, and then also just to protect the highlights so it all looked balanced. And I know with these particular cameras I do have a couple of stops I can probably push things in post. So I wouldn't make that a habit of doing this, but for this particular video I just made the call on the day to get rolling with the interview, and I knew I was going to bring this back up in post. Now, the first thing I did is I raised everything quite a lot in the primaries. Now, this is quite an extreme difference here, but I just wanted to bring everything up a lot more, and then I bring back in some of the contrast and these kind of things later. The way I did that was I just used some of the primary wheels. You can play around with this a bit. I actually think probably it could come down a little bit more. But I just played around until I was reasonably happy with the levels and how Glenn, our subject, was looking and how he was, looking in the frame and if he was light enough. So that was more just based on what I felt looked right. I wouldn't always do my exposure adjustments here in the primaries. Sometimes I just use the global exposure setting here in the HDR panel. This can work really well as well. I'll just make a new node just to show you. So what we could do is we can just sort of pull up the overall exposure, and this does it in a sort of really accurate way. It's kind of more similar to how exposure gets pushed up in Lightroom, so it's just a really nice way to adjust the exposure here. So that's usually my first steps, is adjusting sort of the overall exposure until it's in a reasonable place, what I consider a good place. And I do that either with primary adjustments here or with the HDR global adjustment to push the exposure up or down. Then what we need to do next is try to balance the footage a little bit. There's different ways to do this. I wouldn't always recommend using temperature and tint. It's often not the best way to do it depending on the footage. But actually this one was I was pretty happy just about with where it was sitting. So I just used in the HDR palette the temperature and tint to really slightly adjust this. It's probably so subtle you can't see it. But I just wanted to show you. So it's taken down some of the blue and some of the magenta. I think it's looking quite nice. Let's just have a look at it full screen. So before and after, I'm just turning the node on enough. So I pushed a bit more green in, which I do think looks nicer on the skin tone. I'm mostly worrying about the skin tones here. You can see it's also affecting the overall image, the colours on this shirt and everything else in the scene. But this looks about a reasonable place to do it. I don't like to sit too long on one clip either, because you can get sort of used to it and your eyes can adjust and you stop seeing some of the differences so well. So another really important thing is matching the clips. So this was something I had to do. I had to match the clips. Now, as you can see, what I can do here is select both of the clips so I can see them at the same time. So if I select both the clips, click this up here, this little grid for split screen, and then on the drop down menu, click selected clips. Now you can have even more selected clips, as you can see here. So you can have really as many as you like, I think. But for now, because I'm just trying to match between the close and the wide shots for the interview, because that's quite crucial, I select both of them. As you can see, this one's pushed a lot more warm at the moment, and we want to match to this one. You might prefer how it looks warm, but for this one I'm going to try and just match to this. This is what I did on the day as well. Now there's different ways you can do the balance adjustment. You could, for example, I'll just label this. What you could do is, again, go into the HDR palette and you could match using the sliders here. So I can see that it's this clip. If I make it larger again, you can see this is more full screen. We can always also do a, one moment, I'll just zoom in a little bit more. Yeah, what we can do is we can push this a little bit more towards blue, and then I think we can go a little bit more towards green here. Obviously the exposure looks a little bit off still, but the colors are way, if we turn that on and off, you can see the colors are starting to get much closer to this. So I won't spend too much time on this, otherwise it'd be a really long video, and I would spend more time getting these to be a closer match. But essentially this is sort of the kind of process I do. There's different ways you can look and compare selected clips. There's different options as well, like you can select the neighboring clips, for example, and then also, yeah, just selected clips. This is a good one. You can do things as well, like if I could, for example, grab a still of this one, click on this one, then select in my gallery up here the clip that I wanted. So let's select this one, and then we can do sort of a wipe across up here. There's different ways you can do this. You can select different options for wiping across, and it's just to check how closely you can use it to check how closely the colors and the exposure are matching. Obviously this looks a little bit off still, You can wipe across like this. Okay, but let's say for time's sake, we're happy with the balance. I'm aware it's not balanced with the other one, but let's say we're happy with the balance. Then again, we can maybe add in a bit of contrast or drop the blacks here again. So again, I'm just doing sort of minor adjustments to these clips now just to get them matching close enough. I can always go back and refine it a bit more later. But really, that's 80 to 90% of it is just getting those bits right. And once you've done that, all the rest is sort of more creative decisions or fine tuning. But if you get this right and you match the clips and these kind of things, then you can just start having a bit more fun with it. Now, the first part of the creative bit, again, I always think from the biggest gains to then secondary adjustments, smaller adjustments. But for this particular video, I'll go back to the wide. Let's find an interesting frame of Glenn. And then, yeah, what I did to add more of a look. Now, let's say I'm kind of happy with the exposure, happy with the saturation level, the contrast, it looks pretty good to me. Then I add in more of a look over in the timeline setting, timeline window. This looks quite subtle, and that's what I wanted for this. I wanted to add a bit of a film look to it. It's quite a sort of a nostalgic piece, and I just wanted to add in a little bit of halation, a little bit of glow, a bit of softness, and a little bit more of filmic saturation. So because that's what I knew I wanted to do, the easiest way to do that was using Resolve's built-in film look creator. So this is something you can add in as one of the effects. I'll just show you in here. Go into the library on effects and search film look creator, and then we can drag that onto our node. Because I've got that already applied, I'm just going to turn that off now. Now if you press Shift and F, you can make this larger, which is just a little tip. And in here, I can turn this on and off so you can see the effect a bit more. It's just added a bit of softness, as you can see, and a bit of halation. You don't always want to do this, and I've gone a little bit further than I would with some projects here, but because it was a piece about looking back in time and nostalgia, I wanted to push the halation and the film look a little bit more for this one. But it really depends on your project and what the sort of vision is for it. So inside of here, I set some different settings. I mainly really used this for the effects. I added a little bit of a film look here. I quite liked how the cinematic one looked. And all I did was, you can select different looks down here. Some of these are based on film stocks. But I quite liked Resolve's cinematic one, and then I just sort of moved that about until I kind of liked where it looked. That's all there was to that. And you can also play around with the skin bias as well. And I just moved that until it looked, where I liked it. Down in the color settings, I added in a little bit of contrast here. Like I said, you can do this in different spots, but I just felt overall the whole thing needed a little bit more contrast. And I also added in subtractive saturation. So this is sort of more dense saturated colors, which, I think looks nice and works well for this scene where we've got different nice reds, which I deliberately put in there, and greens, and it just helps to sort of make those colours a bit more rich and filmic. I added in a little bit of a fade. You can, looking at it again, I maybe went a bit too far with that fade, but again, because I was going for this slightly filmic look, I wanted to add in a bit of a fade to the shadows to just make it look a little bit more, filmy. I also added in a little bit of a split tone. It's not a strong one at all. I'm not actually a big fan of split tones overall. But yeah, what I did was I added in a little bit of split tone, again, just to bring in a really subtle film look. I used the natural setting here, not the strong. And then I like to click protect neutrals as well. I just preferred how that looks. Again, have a play around with that, and it depends on your project. And then I played around with the settings here until I was happy. I didn't add the vignette here, I added that in a different way, which I'll talk about. Now, as I mentioned, what I really wanted to do in this setting was add in some of the film effects. So add in some of the halation, which you'll see appearing on the highlights up here. I can zoom in just so you can see it even more. Like I said, I've maybe gone a little bit strong with it, and they'd probably be a bit more subtle on other projects. But for this one, I quite liked it, and I think it worked for the film we were working on. Again, then you just play around with the settings here until you're sort of happy with them. I don't like to mess around with the hue too much or the saturation, but I can turn that on and off again so you can see it just adds this nice glow and a bit of nice roll off from the highlights, again, for a sort of filmic look. But depending on what you're shooting, this may not work at all. I also knew I wanted to soften it all down a bit, and this is quite a strong effect. I normally wouldn't push this so far, but I just wanted to add a bit more of a bloom to create that nice sort of soft nostalgic feel. So I've added in a bit of a bloom here. I think it's still reasonably subtle, but it's just added this nice glow. I just liked how it looked overall, and I thought it worked again. Grain, I also added in some grain. Again, I just wanted to tie in with that filmic look. It suits the project. We were looking at old film photos, old film footage in the project, so having a bit of a grain as well to to sort of soften out the image and just make it look a bit more organic also worked. I used custom, there's some good presets in here as well, they're a reasonable starting point, but I just played around until I liked it, so it wasn't too much and didn't look too artificial and too much for the project, so I just wanted a bit of a subtle grain to it. And I did defocus the image really slightly because I just felt like it looked a little bit overly digitally sharp, so I just kind of dragged that down a little bit from 1 to just reduce that harshness. So 0.9 seemed to work quite well. It gets a bit too mushy if you go down too far. You might like that, but I liked it around here. I didn't mess around with flicker or gate weave or film gate here because I wasn't trying to make it look exactly like I was trying to pretend I shot it on film. I just wanted to bring in some of that filmic charm to it. And I sometimes think if these are used wrong, the flicker, the gate weave and the film gate, they can look a bit cheesy and obvious. They've got their place, but for this sit-down interview, that was about right for me, and that's all I used that for. You can obviously do a lot stronger effects and mess around with the settings to see what you like. But for me, I'll just turn that on and off again, turn it on and off. So it does make a difference, but it's not doing too much. And as you can see, really, again, the main work was done in those primary sort of adjustments that we did in the group nodes. Now, I was going back and forward on this, but I just felt later on that I just wanted to give it all a bit more of a soft glow and lift everything a bit more. So I actually added an overall glow to it. Again, it's relatively subtle, but I just wanted to again add in this sort of slightly nostalgic, creamy glow to it, because I think it suited the theme again as well. It's maybe a little bit strong looking at it again now, but I liked it. It just lifted everything up a bit. And yeah, basically I just went with what felt right at the time for the video. Now, the way I did this was I used Resolve's built-in glow effect. There's some tutorials on how to do this. Really, the main things that you need to change is the glow framing to reflecting camera and the composite type to soft light. And then you can play around with the thresholds and all the other settings again and everything. But setting it to soft light, it kind of makes it as a nice overlay, and it interacts with the lighting you already had in the scene. And then I messed around with the global blend until it looked kind of a good balance and not too much, not too little. So that was it for the sort of overall look. And really, this is sort of doing 90% of the work now. After that, I get into even bits that I really enjoy, which is little secondary things that probably most people wouldn't even notice, but I liked, and I just feel it helps to add balance to the overall frame. So for me, this is the most fun part. But really, overall, I could just be finished like that. I think that looks good enough, but I like to mess around a little bit more, and I do things like, for example, I saw these cups here, and I didn't quite look like how some of the greens looked, and the same with the hat here. So these are sort of secondary adjustments that I did. So I've labeled them, for example, if you look at the green of the hat here, I just changed this to a nicer green, at least what I thought was a nicer green. And also the hats that we used in some of the photos that Glenn was sharing, he had lots of different hats. So I just wanted it to look a little bit more like some of the hats he was wearing in the old photos he shared. So again, it's really subtle, but I think these little splashes of color, these little accents, actually, even though they're subtle, when you put them all together in the whole frame, it helps to just make a more pleasing image. So then what I also did is I noticed these cups over here, and I wanted to have sort of something that looked a bit more cohesive. So I just changed the color of these cups so that they matched more with the green of the hat. Again, most people probably wouldn't even care about this or notice, but for me, it helped just make a more balanced, pleasing frame. If in real life, I could have just got these to match better, and I had a bigger budget for props and things, and of course I would have done this. But it was easy enough to do in post, and it's a nice little touch. I really like that kind of stuff. I guess I nerded out a bit on it. I also went as far as changing the tag on the hat so it was more close to the colours of this mug, and I like these because these were kind of similar to the colour of the box over here. So again, I'm just trying to create a bit more harmony across the colours and bring them all closer together. Another secondary adjustment, which I should have labelled here, was just I felt like this highlight was a little bit hot here. If I had more time, I probably would have tried to control these more. Maybe I could have ended the window, but I didn't have the budget or the time to do it on this one, and I don't think it's the most important thing. The most important thing is Glenn and how he looks in the frame. But I just added this just to bring down that window, just to make it a little bit less distracting, a bit less hot. Obviously the highlights are a bit blown, but I just thought subtle, but it helps just bring your eye more to Glenn a bit more. And then talking of bringing your eye more to the subject, more to Glenn, I also added in a vignette. Now, I mentioned that I like to do this myself. The reason I like to do this myself is I don't like necessarily how vignettes are added by Resolve by default, where it's just a circle around it, because I think it looks a bit more natural if you create your own shape. So I use this in a power window, and I use the pen tool down here, and I just draw one that masks where the source of light's coming from, This depends on your project and how you lit it, and you can change this, but I just sort of more or less tried to mask where the light source was coming from and guide your eye towards Glenn in a more natural way. Again, I'll just turn that on and off so you can see. It's really subtle. I didn't want to go too overboard with it, but it just helps to lower some of the distractions here and guide your eye towards Glenn. I did the same on the close-up as well. And I also, in the final one over here, sorry, this isn't how the final one looked, but I'll just show you something I did. If I can find a clip where you can see behind Glenn, I didn't really like how this yellow looked in this book, and I wanted it to be more harmonious with the yellow in the wide shot as well. So I actually just brought all the yellows closer to the sort of yellow that we had in the other shots. For example, on the close-up clip, I also made some adjustments to the yellows here to make them more harmonious and match with the wide shot. And really it was just to make it a slightly more pleasing yellow, shade of yellow. This one I just didn't quite like. I wanted something a little bit more dense and a bit more kind of like a Kodak yellow orange, if you like. Again, this is personal preference, but I just think these little differences when you add them all up. So if I turn these all off for you now, sorry, I'll just hide this power window. One moment, so you don't have to look at that. Yeah, if I just turn these all on and off, so altogether they do actually add up to quite a big difference in the scene, as you can see here. But when you're adding them in, they look like really small things, but I just think it helped to make the whole scene a bit more harmonious. I'll show you on the widescreen. Great. Now, there was other scenes in there, but it's just going to turn into too long a video otherwise. But I just wanted to hopefully share with you some of the things I like to do in the grade, how I approach the grade, and how really 90% of it's done with the color space transforms, and how we shot it, and obviously set dressed it on the day. And then also with the exposure and the balance adjustments. And then after that, you can just, once you get that down and you match all your clips, you can just start having fun with your sort of look in here, and then also with sort of these little secondary adjustments. I've got loads more tips and things I'd like to share with color grading, but I think those can wait for another video. And I followed a similar process for all of the other clips as well. I won't go through all of these now again, because the video will get way, way too long. But we had lots of other shots as well, and I did very similar things with those. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I'll be back again soon. I've got some projects where I've been working on 16mm film, and I'm thinking to put together a couple of videos on that as well to share some of those experiences from working on film. It's been really, really exciting, been really difficult as well in a great way. So I'll join you very soon on those videos where we talk about 16mm. Thanks for watching, and I'll join you soon.